11:15 is the time here in the WHIP studios. It's Zach Gelb and Mike Zahn here with you for the main event on WHIP Radio in Philadelphia. We're getting ready for the Final Four. Villanova will play Oklahoma, and UNC will play Syracuse on Saturday night. And now joining us is a man that's been covering college athletics for a long time, now working with Fox Sports 1, and that is Tim Brando. Tim, it's Zach and Mike back in Philly. Thanks for a few minutes, and how are you, my friend?
Happy to be with both of you.
You've been covering the NCAA Tournament for a very long time, and you've seen these games go year after year. Give us some of your best memories from the NCAA Tournament.
Oh, well, gosh, and those that I had the honor of broadcasting, I mean, there are so many that, I was in attendance or I was covering either locally or regionally. But when I started at ESPN, people forget that until 1990, CBS didn't carry the entire tournament. It's a little bit like the NBA was, the weeknight games were on tape delay. The NCAA basketball tournament was not on CBS completely, even when CBS got the tournament in 1982. The early rounds weren't deemed important enough back in those days. And so ESPN was looking for some programming, and I think made the first round kind of what it became. When it went from 48 teams to 64 teams, so much so that CBS couldn't afford not to carry all of the games when they got the second contract in 1990. And in those days, I was hosting along with John Saunders the day and night version of the first and second rounds. So I was involved with it, that far back. And then when I joined CBS in 1996. I had in my first year, I had a 16 seed almost beat a 1. People they remember Princeton and Georgetown, but they forget about Western Carolina and Purdue in Albuquerque in 96. Probably even a better chance because there were 3 looks at the basket, and the iron was unkind all 3 times. A shot, a follow shot, and a tip-in opportunity to send it to overtime. Neither of them went in. Purdue, obviously wasn't Georgetown, and Princeton is a little bit more well-known than a university than Western Carolina. But that was my first year, and a 16 almost beat a 1. That very rarely happens. And one year in Tampa in 2008, Mike Jaminski and I were together, and all 4 lower seeds, all 4 of the seeds that were wearing darker uniforms, beat the teams wearing the lighter uniforms. So we had upsets in every game, and 2 of them were buzzer beaters. San Diego beating Connecticut, and a really outstanding 30-win Drake team lost to Western Kentucky. And that was pretty incredible. Michigan State got to a Final Four one year through a buzzer beater Corey Lucius hit right after Reyes Vasquez had gone the distance and made a remarkable play to give Maryland the lead in Spokane. There's countless examples. The Butler did it again, when Howard tipped it in against in Washington, D.C. in 2011. They're trying to get back to their second Final Four. They beat Old Dominion in round 1 with a tip-in at the buzzer, and then did it again to Pitt, the number 1 seed, in the next round with the same play. Guard named Van Zandt drove it in. I mean, I can go on and on with these kinds of stories that I had. And then a super comeback in 98 for me. I was working with Al McGuire.
That was some run.
To go to the Final Four. Stanford came from 6 down in 35 seconds to beat Rhode Island. And that team had Catino Mobley and Wheeler and a lot of really good talent for Jim Herrick. But Arthur Lee and the Mad Dog, Mark Madsen, made plays down the stretch, and Stanford went on to the Final Four. And Al McGuire was out there dancing with the tree, the Stanford tree, after the game. And I think maybe because of the month that I spent with Al that year, because who he was and the way he was and the impact he had on me, not just as a broadcaster but as a human being, I think that's my greatest treasure is the time I spent with Al in 97 and 98.
So many great memories, and this tournament has really been a great one. The first 4 days were just unbelievable. Buzzer beater after buzzer beater. You had Michigan State, who I thought was going to win it all. They went down, and you've just seen this tournament. You really have a lot of seniors in this as well. I just think it's a little bit refreshing to see these seniors back in play in the NCAA tournament after seeing so many years of the one-and-dones.
Yeah, I really agree, and a lot of them are with teams that historically would have one-and-done. Syracuse, North Carolina, these are teams that you would think would have multiple one-and-dones perhaps, and yet they don't. And a lot of these seniors have emerged, and become really, really outstanding players, have fought through some injuries and made comebacks, like Marcus Page at North Carolina. Bryce Johnson's made himself a lot of money in this tournament, I think, for his future with the way he's been playing. The Villanova team, people talk about, how they're a heavyweight out of the Big East Conference, and that may be true in terms of its reputation as a national champion 31 years ago. But I mean, I think I'm probably preaching to the choir in Philadelphia when I say that this is a team that, it may have some pros, but we don't know the level of where these guys will play pro ball. I mean, it's not like a given that any one of these guys are going to step onto an NBA floor and be playing anytime real soon. I think Daniel Ochefu has certainly made himself a lot of money, and I think put himself in a position to be an NBA player. But he was a project a few years ago. I remember talking with, it was the last game I did at CBS. It was Villanova and Syracuse in 2013, and Villanova was undefeated at the time. It was the first year of the new Big East, and I was talking to Jay about his team, an old coffee shop across the street from our hotel in the Newhouse School, where the Syracuse broadcasters to be are always in school. And Jay was telling me, we've got this big kid. We just don't have many big kids. We're a guard-laden team. And we've got this big kid, and I think he's really going to be good. But he's not there yet. And right now, here's how we use him. But we hope and we believe that we can turn him into a real force. And lo and behold, look what's happened with the kid. Now the team really does utilize the half-court offense inside out through Daniel Ochefu. And that's an ultimate project turned prospect. We're talking about a team concept here is my point. Not a bunch of lottery picks. These are guys that if they do play at the next level, they will have earned it by virtue of the way they really improved while they were playing at the college level. And I think that speaks volumes. Look, Oklahoma is another veteran team. Cousins and Spangler and Buddy Hield, these guys have been around. So everywhere you look, and the Syracuse team is a similar story. Trevor Cooney, what a great story this kid is. Maligned, always compared to Jerry McNamara out of Delaware, always really kind of not meeting the expectations of the fans there, and now suddenly he's gotten his chance. And Michael Deneget, a transfer from Duke, that doesn't happen very often, finding a home with Boeheim and coming in as a 10 seed. It's remarkable. So everywhere you turn, there's a great story.
And with this Villanova team, it here in Philadelphia, the Big Five, there's just so many rivalries, but at the end of the day, there's still a respect level. And even though I'm not a fan of Villanova, it's tough not to root for these kids. Just like you say, there's such a team effort on the basketball court, and they had an enormous amount of pressure, Tim, going into this NCAA tournament after how the last few have fared with those early exits, and they responded brilliantly, led by their head coach, Jay Wright.
Yeah, I thought that once they got to the second weekend, they were going to hit on all cylinders, and that's really what happened. Now, they didn't play their best offensive game against Kansas, but that's because they had to concentrate so much defensively on really what they had to do to get enough stops to win. Kansas is so effective and so physically dominating against a lot of teams that they play, and they were, on paper, from a physical standpoint, the better team. And I think Villanova's players understood that. Jay certainly got their attention, and their attention to detail about how they were going to have to defend and swarm and trap to get the guards of Kansas out of whack. That was really the difference in the game. And so I think their shooting suffered a little bit from that, plus the early foul difficulty for Chris Jenkins. who had just been absolutely on fire until that game, probably impaired them offensively. But, you know, the first weekend was the tough weekend for them. You know, they needed to get that proverbial monkey off their back, and they had just had some bad draws in recent years. And, you know, Michigan State, we all sort of thought, hey, looks like a balanced tournament field without a dominant team. It's just, you know, we're so accustomed to seeing Izzo's teams get there. Look, it happens. He got a bad matchup against the 15 seed that was probably misseeded, and Michigan State is home after one game. And then as bad as what happened for Syracuse was they're the wrong team to play with one day to prepare, and that's why I think Middle Tennessee ran into the roadblock they did. Otherwise, who knows? They might have gotten to the next weekend. But Villanova was in a position, I thought, to play with more freedom. Probably one of the few teams they could play would be that would have more pressure than them to win is Kansas. So this was one of those rare opportunities for Jay and that group of veteran players to play as the underdog and sort of be the hunter as opposed to the hunted, which they've been all season long in the Big East. And I thought they responded beautifully to that. And, you know, the interview that Archie Diacono gave, along with Jay in the aftermath of that game, sort of said it all to me. This is a kid that, you know, in this era of so-called one-and-dones, and not just that, I don't, you know, not all one-and-dones are bad stories. A lot of them have done great things that really embrace the college experience. But in an era that is about me, this was about team, and university. Archie Diacono, in tears, Ryan talking about how much he loves Villanova University. And while everyone wanted it for him, he wanted it for Villanova more than he wanted it for himself. And I thought that embodied really what Villanova's program's all about. It's got to make Jay very proud because that's what he's done. You know, he went back into Philly, as you know, and a lot of people my age certainly know. It was Jay that brought Rolly Massimino back into the program. It was Jay that brought back so many others from even further back than the 80s that were Villanova greats back into the program to make sure everyone knew that the Villanova family, all generations, matters. You know, in his heart, he's a South Philly guy. He wants Villanova to be the team of Philadelphia. He understands that they're one of the Big Five, but he wants Villanova to be the team that represents the city, all aspects of it. And I think that's a beautiful thing. That's a great foundation for your program, and I think it's the blueprint, really, for a lot of other schools to follow. If you're a basketball small institution that maybe doesn't have a big-time Division I football power and you want to be successful at a top-shelf level in basketball, then Villanova is your blueprint.
We're talking to Fox Sports commentator in Tim Brando. And Tim, I think that this Villanova team has captivated the city. They really have put on quite a show, and maybe that's more so because, you know, the professional sports within the city haven't been as strong as in previous years. I think this Villanova team, they have their own identity. If you could compare this Villanova team to any previous tournament teams, who would you compare them to?
Wow. You know, that's an interesting one. In a lot of ways, you know, Villanova's, you know, they're kind of a walking contradiction in a lot of ways because it is a smaller institution than a lot of the other big state universities that they're going up against at this level. But they do have an incredible heavyweight reputation in college basketball, always have. And that was even pre-Big East. Villanova was well respected in basketball. But in recent years, I don't know that you can compare them to anyone. That's what makes them so unique. They have, at no point in time do they not have five guys on the floor that can all score. Four of those five, you know, even Ochefu, when he gets the ball now, can put the ball on the deck and make a play. He did that several times in the Kansas game, and that certainly wasn't the case a couple of years ago. If they lose Archie Diacono or Brunson to some early fouls, then they come out with Booth and they come out with Bridges, and these guys are also making plays. So you never are really without, and if Ochefu has to leave for any period of time, Reynolds can come in and be a factor. So they've got so many interchangeable parts and probably greater depth than people realize. I think maybe the Kansas game, people finally realized how much depth Villanova had, because they did lose Jenkins early, and I think a lot of people felt like Chris Jenkins had to be hot for them to beat KU, and he was sitting most of the first half, and it really didn't matter. They extended their lead at that time before losing the lead and then having to come back to win the game. I don't think there is anyone you could compare Villanova to. I guess to answer your question, I think they're unique in today's college basketball, and from a in terms of history, in a lot of ways, you look at them and you go, physically, this is not an overpowering team, but they represent Villanova, which is an overpowering name in college basketball.
Now, you've been fortunate enough to cover multiple Final Fours, and from a media aspect, just how does the Final Four compare to other sports championship finals or final series?
Well, let me put it to you this way, okay? This is my third year not to cover the NCAA Tournament as a broadcaster. I left CBS after 2013. I'll be going to my third Final Four, even though I no longer cover it at all. Okay, I do some work for the National Association of Basketball Coaches. I MC some champions luncheons and the Guardians of the Game awards that they have on Sunday night. I've MC'd that in recent years, and I'm always thankful that they asked me to come back. And I take my family with me, and we go and we enjoy the Final Four. I've also been involved with college football, as you know, for a long, long time.
Sure.
I never went to a BCS national championship game unless it was being held in New Orleans, which is close to my home in Shreveport, Louisiana. I never went to Arizona for one. I never went to the Rose Bowl for one. Okay, because it's just it did not interest me at the level the Final Four does. I think the Final Four is the greatest amateur event in sports. I think semifinal Saturday is the greatest conglomeration of intercollegiate athletics in one house in one day that you could possibly have. 4 teams with 4 different colors, all in whether it's an arena that's hosting it or a dome that's hosting it. I don't care. I want to be there. It always delivers the goods. You know, you can have one college football championship game, and it may be great or it may be a dud. But you very rarely, if ever, go to a Final Four and not have one of the 3 games, if not all 3 of them, or at the very least 2 of the 3 of them, give you what you want. It always answers the bell. So since 1981, when I came to Philly, and Indiana beat North Carolina and Virginia played LSU at the last consolation game at the Spectrum, I've missed 2 Final Fours as a broadcaster. Now, the last 3 years, even though I'm associated with it, I'm actually a fan of it now. I'm not calling the games, and people say, do you miss working the tournament? But to a certain extent, I guess anyone would miss doing it, but I'm still a fan of it. Okay, I'm as big a fan of college basketball after I'm done with what I have to do with the Big East and the ACC. And even though I'm not doing the NCAAs anymore, I'm still a fan of it, and I will consume it as long as it's there. So that should answer your question.
Wrapping up with Tim Brando, who joins us right now from Fox Sports 1. And you know how college athletics sometimes is perceived here on the East Coast and really in a city like Philadelphia. And I'm from New York, but when I came to Philly, everyone said, hey, this is a pro sports town. It's a pro sports town. But this year, with the way the pro sports teams have been such a dud, really, both football in college with the Temple Owls and then basketball with Villanova has captivated this city. So just since you've been around the college game for so many years, what do people say nationally about this Temple football program?
Well, I would say, hopefully in Philadelphia, this example should be, see what you're missing? I'd put it to you that way. Even when the Eagles get their act together and the 76ers, Phillies get their act together, and the Flyers are a factor, and they see what you're missing? I mean, college athletics should have its proper place, no matter how many sports franchises that are pro franchises are big in your city. It's a different demographic, I think, that's involved in college sports. Most of it's young. That's one of the reasons why you're seeing more and more of it on television, and it won't go away. the attraction to what makes intercollegiate athletics so much fun. Yeah, I mean, listen, it's not a perfect world. There are issues. Let's not forget Syracuse is coming off sanctions, and Boeheim missed 9 games this year as a result of them. And North Carolina is under investigation for academic fraud from a few years back. But that has nothing to do with these players that Roy's got. The reality is those issues remain, and all too often, I think, in pro sports markets, the people that are in the media that are really unhappy members of the media love to take their shots at college athletics, and they'll take them freely, knowing that the college athletics does not have a defense mechanism quite like the commissioner of the NFL that can maybe take your credential away. And that's unfortunate. I think there's been a history of condescending reporting on college athletics, and that's unfortunate. And a lot of it happens in pro sports towns. It just does. I'm not saying specifically Philly or specifically New York, I'm just saying in general, the Northeast and the far West too, both have been very difficult in pro sports towns on intercollegiate athletics. I would say to you that stories like Temple and what Coach Rule has done there, and certainly what happened this basketball season with Villanova, and for that matter too, St. Joe's and Martelli, I mean, they represented themselves very well, I thought, in the NCAAs. This is these are uplifting stories that everyone should embrace, and I think maybe that's the great lesson that ought to be learned.
Now, before we let you run, there's a lot of storylines for this weekend. How will Villanova defend Buddy Hield? And then you have a great coaching matchup between Jim Boeheim and Roy Williams. Give me Tim Brando's expert analysis and the predictions. Who's going to be going to the championship game on Monday?
Well, I'm picking a shocking Saturday because I don't know too many people that have Syracuse and Villanova in the final.
Wow, old Big East.
Yeah, I think that the issue with Syracuse. Let me start with that one first. Syracuse played North Carolina in a very competitive game in Chapel Hill earlier this year. I didn't have the game, but I watched the game closely. In fact, I think I was over in Durham getting ready to do a game that same period. I had just had NC State and Syracuse just before they played that game against North Carolina. And you know what Syracuse knows is that their 2-3 zone is always going to have their back. And now they know that even if they get behind, people used to say, well, if you play the zone, you're in trouble because once you're down double digits, there's no way you can come back, and especially against a team like Virginia. Well, now, you know, they found out that they could do that by extending their zone and going with zone trapping full court across the board. North Carolina, as good as they are, they can sometimes be their own worst enemy when they start making a lot of three-point shots. They need to stay going inside, allow Kennedy Meeks and Bryce Johnson and Joel James to do some damage because they do have superior size and strength and depth inside. But what happens a lot with Roy's teams, because they play fast and get impatient, they start falling in love with the three. And sometimes in the NCAA tournament, you can be scorching the nets one weekend, get to another building and another stage, and suddenly the iron is unkind. What do you do then? I think Syracuse defensively is going to be able to slow the game down, just as Notre Dame did. But the difference is Notre Dame's defense had a lot of leakage, had way too much leakage. Syracuse won't have the same within that zone. And I think they're a veteran group, and because they're in the same league, there is no fear factor here. They know they can play with North Carolina. They played them off their feet. It was a 2-possession game in Chapel Hill. So I think that the intangibles are all with Syracuse. And I think they're going to have a chip on their shoulder for their coach as well, given what's happened with the NCAA. So I like Syracuse in that game. With Villanova, they're going to the perfect team for them to have played before Oklahoma was Kansas, because they've got to do the same thing with Buddy Hield that they did with the backcourt, they did with Selden to force him into a bad game, and what they did with the guards, who are very athletic. All of those guards for Kansas are very athletic. And they basically took them away with their trapping. And that blueprint for success against KU will be the same one that they use against Oklahoma. And remember, as good as Buddy Buckets is, and the Sooners are, this is their first real step on this stage, too. Just as it is for Villanova, This is a new setting for Oklahoma as well. So I think the veterans of Villanova will handle it better, and I believe in both cases, Villanova's defense and Syracuse defense will have the back of any offensive deficiencies that they may have in these games. And that's why I'm going with the 2 upsets.
Hey, Tim, we appreciate the time. Thanks so much. It was great.
My pleasure.
There is Tim Brando joining us on the hotline, WHIP Radio in Philadelphia. We got to take a quick break, and when we get back, we got to turn the page and do some Flyers talk, in addition to get to this Nick Young story with D'Angelo Russell that's just going wild all over the internet. So 215-204-WHIP is the number. He's Mike Zahn. I'm Zach Gelb. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back.